Welcome to everyone. This week video will cover the S&P 500 for the week of June 30th, 2025. Before we start, make sure you read the disclaimer carefully. In my May 26th update, we have the 18-month cycle bottom formation confirmation on April 7th. The SP500 reached a low of 4,835. Approximately 200 points or 4.31% above his potential 4,639 target. Let's see what we can expect for this 18-month cycle. We can expect the new 18-month cycle peak to form around January 2026. When this peak will occur, this will provide an important information about the size of the next correction. If the S&P 500 peaks before December or January, then we can expect a significant correction for the next 18-month cycle low. If the peak occurs after January 2026, the correction should be moderate. The next 18-month cycle low is expected between September and October 2026. Technically, during the next 18-month correction, the S&P 500 should cross below its cycle line, providing a downside target. During the last decline, the SP 500 missed his target, which usually a bullish sign. But like mentioned in my last Dow Jones Industrial Average update 2 weeks ago, since the monthly midpoint, 5,265, barely crossed below his cycle line, 5,378. And in the next bar we didn't have confirmation, the 4,639 target is technically invalid. I am going to be the devil's advocate. Let's assume we trade the downside target. On a lower time frame, we had a signal to exit the position, taking some profits. When the SP 500 rebound, he crossed above his cycle line and trigger a 6,183 upside target. With last Thursday high, the SP 500 meet his target for a 674 point or 12.23% profit. The yellow uptrend line represent the 18-month cycle trend line, or what Hurst called a VTL. When the SP 500 will cross below it, this will confirm the higher peak before the crossing will be at least the 54-month cycle peak. And the SP 500 will be on his way to his next 54-month cycle low. Also, when the SP 500 will cross below his cycle trend line, this will help us to identify the previous 54-month cycle low from 2022 or 2023. When the market missed its downside target, it indicates bulls are returning, and bears lack sufficient power to push prices lower. Conversely, when the market missed an upside target, bears are regaining control and bulls are too weak to push prices higher. The 40-week cycle. The blue line represent the 40-week cycle line, or the FLD. Despite a sharp rebound since the last 40-week cycle low formation in April 7th, and also despite the SP 500 is at his previous all-time high, the market's still trading below his cycle line. Is it the first weakness sign? To confirm, the SP 500 is still in bull market. The market have to cross above his cycle line sharply with a green candle. If this week the SP 500 trade above his cycle line with a bullish candle, then we will have a crossing point at 6,078 and a potential upside target at 7,321. We have to keep a very close look at this 40-week cycle line, and also where the 40-week cycle peak will occur. The next 40-week cycle peak is expected by the end of August, with the low by late December 2025, the blue dashed line. If the peak occur before August, this will confirm some weakness coming into the market. And there is a possibility the SP 500 won't meet his upside target if the market cross above his cycle line during the next 40-week cycle low formation. The SP 500 should form his low on his cycle line. Is still little bit too early to know where the cycle lines will be. When the next 40-week cycle low will be confirmed, I will draw the 40-week cycle trend line, the VTL. When the market will cross below it, this will help us to identify the next 18-month cycle peak and anticipate the next correction. The 20-week cycle. The green line represents the 20-week cycle line. The April 7th low met and exceeded its target, confirming the low as part of a higher degree cycle. During the May 11th week, The S&P 500 crossed above its cycle line at 5,847, providing an upside target of 6,859, a potential 1,000-point or 17% rally. If the S&P 500 reached this target, it will set a new historic high. This 20-week cycle peak was expected to form around June 15, with the low by the end of August. Last week the SP 500 made a high, right on the peak of the cycle. If the market keep moving up for the next 2 or 3 weeks, the peak of this 20 weeks will be on the right part of the cycle. If this the case, then we can expect a moderate correction. We can anticipate the 20-week cycle peak formation by analyzing the next lower time frame, the 80-day cycle. Technically, this 20-week cycle low should form on its cycle line and find support there. At that time the cycle line will be at 6,010. If during the next 20-week cycle low formation, the S&P 500 cross sharply below its cycle line, this will confirm increasing market bearishness. When the 20 weeks will be confirmed, I will draw the 20 weeks VTL. This will help us to identify the next 40 weeks cycle peak. Here the cycle line and their potential target if the SP 500 cross below during the next few weeks. But until the SP 500 cross below his 20 weeks cycle line, the 6,859 target still valid. If the SP 500 cross below his cycle line before meeting his target, this will invalid the target and will also be bearish for the market. Since the beginning of the year, the 20-week cycle success rate is 100%. The 80-day cycle. The last SP 500 80-day cycle peak formed on June 11 at 6,059 and is low on June 23 at 5,943.23. By forming his low on June 23, this 80-day cycle was 9 days longer than expected. As expected, the SP 500 formed his low on his cycle line. We started a new 80-day cycle on June 23. And the peak for this new 80-day cycle is expected on July 27. The low on August 30, the purple vertical dashed line. During the next 80 days cycle low formation, technically the SP 500 should cross below his cycle line, providing a downside target. Here the cycle line and their potential target if the SP 500 cross below them. After confirmation of the 80-day cycle low, I draw the 80-day cycle trend line, the purple trend line. When the SP 500 will cross below, will confirm the 80-day cycle peak, but also more important, the potential 20-week cycle peak. During the rebound the SP 500 crossed above his cycle line at 5,577, providing an upside 6,319 target, which is a new all-time high. 742 points or 13% of potential profit. The SP 500 is on his way to his 6,319 target. If the SP 500 reaches target, this will validate the potential 40-week cycle crossing and will confirm the amount of bullishness in the market. The success rate for the 80-day cycle is 75%. The 40-day cycle. With a low at 5,943.23, the SP 500 formed his last 40-day cycle on June 23. On May 1, the SP 500 crossed above his cycle line at 5,536. For a 6,237 target, 701 points or 12.66% of potential profit. At the time of recording this video, the SP 500 made a new all-time high at 6,178.80. Only 59 points away from his target, since the high was within the 1% of margin of error. The target is considered met. The blue trend line is the 40-day cycle trend line. When the market will cross below it, this will confirm the next 80-day cycle peak has formed or in formation. We can expect the next 40-day cycle low to form on July 27. At that time the SP 500 supposed to cross below his cycle line and will provide a downside target. Here the cycle line and their potential target if the SP 500 cross below during the next 40 days low formation. Since the beginning of the year, the 40-day cycle success rate is 100%. In conclusion, We find ourselves at a significant juncture regarding the S&P 500's trajectory. Keeping a close eye on the 40-week cycle line is crucial to determine whether the market remains in a bullish trend or if this rally is merely a bull trap. If the S&P 500 crosses above this line, we can expect further upward movement toward various targets. However, failure to do so may signal bearish conditions ahead. Stay tuned for continuous updates and insights to navigate these market dynamics successfully. For more shorter time analysis, or to consult the success rate table, and to know how the cycles works in great details, I recommend to visit my website, Tradingmarketcycles.com. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up to support my channel. Share it with others, and subscribe so you don't miss any important updates. This concludes this week's video. Thank you for following along. And I'll see you next week with another exciting installment.